everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Jalsa Bi'iyya, a podcast by the Arab Reform Initiative. My name is Christine Mhanna. When we hear the term green transition, we tend to think that it's a simple shift from oil and gas to solar, wind, and other renewable energies. But in reality, green transition isn't just a technical change. It's a very complex process that requires economic and social transformation, effective and good governance, and fair distribution across all segments of society. From Lebanon to Tunisia, we often see that green transition projects are carried out in rural areas. And in this episode, we are here to ask again who is actually benefiting from these projects, from the green transition projects, and are these projects actually addressing inequalities in societies or simply sometimes recreating the inequalities? I'm joined by Yasmina El Amine and Yana Kaissi to answer these questions. Yasmina is a PhD candidate and scholar of energy justice and just transition in the global south. And Yana is an independent energy governance expert. Hi, Yasmina and Yana. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Yes.
Feel free to introduce yourself to us in the way you like, maybe more freely.
Sure. Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Ari, for having this podcast. I think you gave a good introduction of me. I'm doing my PhD specifically on just transition. So I'm looking at how just transition in Tunisia and Lebanon are unfolding, maybe not justly, but probably unjustly unfolding. And I look at the downstream impacts of renewable energy projects. So, how do they impact communities from a socioeconomic perspective? And I also look at the political economy and the colonial or neo colonial aspect of renewable energy projects. And very happy to be here today.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Likewise, joining Yasmina and saying thank you to the Arab Reform Initiative, you, Christine, for the host. I think this is a very relevant topic. I've spent the past 15 years of my life working on the governance issues of energy across many countries in the Middle East, North Africa. My degree is in energy studies, and recently for the past 6 years I've been serving on the global initiative of transparency and accountability, the EITI, as a board member. So I believe, a good understanding of how we are approaching collectively or globally the energy transition agenda with the framework or within the framework of governance. We have some good news, we have some bad news, we have things, challenges to address, especially in MENA. And I think this would be the best opportunity for us to share our ideas. And I'm absolutely honored to be also with Yasmina, whom I really respect and look forward to hearing her thoughts as well.
Thank you so much, Jana and Yasmina. I think you have a lot to share with us. I will start with a more general and regional scope. And I think it's interesting to look at some regional trends in the WANA region. Yasmina, maybe I'll start with you. How do you think the rapid growth of renewable energy projects is impacting socio-economic inequalities in the region today?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good place to start. I think across the world, but in our region specifically, these green projects are having major impacts on socioeconomic inequalities in different ways. I think I'm going to focus on like 4 or 5 ways these are happening. So in our region, unfortunately, we have a lot of water scarcity, and we have also food dependency. So we don't have food sovereignty in many of these countries. And so what's happening lately is that renewable energy projects, because they require a lot of land, specifically when they are mega projects, they are creating a lot of competition with water and food. And this is specifically happening across the region, but in North Africa, where a lot of these projects are usually happening in the desert. This is usually termed in a sort of colonial way as an empty land, a land where people do not live. And so we can go and have these projects, but actually there are a lot of people who live there that they're not probably nomadic, that have maybe a sedentary life, but they do use the land and they are part of the land. And so this is impacting them in a lot of ways. Now, something else that is linked to that is the impacts on lands and livelihoods. So, lands, whether they are being used for agricultural purposes or for other cultural purposes, are sometimes being taken away from people. And the problem with renewable energy projects is that they often exacerbate inequalities between the rural areas and the urban areas. I think Dana will touch more upon this, but just in a few terms, historically cities have always absorbed energy from most of the country. And so when it comes to rural areas where land is maybe more available than densely populated cities, what's happening is that land is being taken away from people. And in these areas, lots of people depend on land for their livelihoods. So this is impacting them. Now, another thing, which is a term that is being used a lot by civil society, by activists in North Africa and the region, but this is a term that stemmed from Latin America, which is green extractivism. So this is very prevalent right now when it comes to the projects that are being introduced by the European Union in the region, and specifically green hydrogen. Unfortunately, this is starting to appear like a probable reality that green hydrogen projects are going to be introduced to the region, that they are going to be produced using land, using resources such as water. Green hydrogen is a very water intensive activity. It's basically breaking down hydrogen and then transforming it to electricity through hydrolysis. But the end result of this process is the shipping of green hydrogen back to Europe. And so this term of extractivism, which is basically accumulation of resources by dispossession of land, dispossession of resources for export, is shaping a lot of renewable energy projects. And then this is also happening. The fourth thing is this link to affordability. So in North Africa, right now, there's a new project, again, introduced by the European Union, to have an interconnector between Tunisia and Italy, which is going to serve as an exchange of renewable energy between the two countries and eventually the two continents. So this is being this is being advocated as a win-win solution. Look, Tunisia, you're going to have less dependence on Algerian gas. We're going to give you renewable energy. You will also be able to sell us renewable energy. Our markets are going to be interconnected. But unfortunately, I think there's a big question mark on this project as well from the affordability side. So the fact that the market in Tunisia is going to be linked to the market in Europe is something that has not been really, I think, investigated enough. What will that mean for price hikes? What will that mean? I mean, Norway a couple of months ago decided to opt out from joining the market in the EU market in terms of the electricity market. So this is also something to look at. And then finally, this is something that's specific to many projects across the region. There's a few questions that we need to ask, and this is where I'll stop. Whenever we're thinking about a renewable energy project, we have to ask, like, who is benefiting? How are costs and benefits being distributed? Are people being consulted? Whose interests are being considered? Whose vulnerabilities are being considered? Are projects exacerbating vulnerabilities? Are there historical injustices that are being deepened by existing projects? Whose knowledge is being taken into account? And unfortunately, across the region, these questions are not being asked, these vulnerabilities are not being taken into consideration. And so I fear that there is a sort of reproduction of extractivist tendencies within these projects, the same extractivist tendencies that happened in the fossil fuel industry. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Interesting, Yasmina. Thank you so much. I think you took us to the local and the general scope, the global scope of inequality, and that's so important. And I will take your question to Diana because I think it's interesting also to understand on the local level in our region, why are rural areas being treated as extraction zones, not areas that should benefit from these resources or be empowered simply?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And yani, I would like to link my answers maybe to hopefully go with the flow of where Yasmina started and continue. So basically, this is, and I think Yasmina pointed to it quite briefly, it's a colonial legacy. So we start, especially when, if I want to take, for example, the examples of Tunisia, Lebanon, the French mandate, you start in the rural areas where it is cheaper, less oversight, there is local labor, and you can just do literally whatever you want in somebody's backyard and nobody's going to ask. So originally, this is where the tendency to start in rural areas came from. Now, with the progress of time, of course, the end of the mandates, the investors' concept or the investors' approach continued. And as investors, they are always prone to look not for what is beneficial to the community, taking that into consideration, but more what would be cheaper for them in all respects, less oversight, as we said, labor acceptability rate is there. They come as the saviors and they start working with the assumption that they can, throw breadcrumbs and the community would rush into it. And that's practically what happens and continues to happen. So this is where we started. Now, there have been a number of issues with time that have surfaced. And one of the key concepts that we have, basically learned to ask for, but not particularly implemented, especially across North Africa, is the concept of the free prior informed consent. Now, as a concept born, with the natives, whether it's in Australia, it's in the US, and in North America, Latin America, the concept is becoming more and more widespread in the MENA culture, so to speak, especially in the rural areas in North Africa where this is happening. Now, before we go into whether it's being implemented or not, free prior informed consent is when an investor or the government or a state-owned enterprise goes in, talks to the indigenous people, to the locals, and actually get the buy-in from the community prior to the start or the launch of any project. Usually it has to do with extractives, mining, oil and gas, quarrying, and the rest. Okay, so I want to also include quarrying here because I think in Lebanon it is less addressed as an extractive activity, but I think we really should take it into consideration because of so many implications that are happening and, the pros and cons of it. So this continues not to be implemented, although in the recent decade or two, we have been hearing voices from the local communities echoed and highlighted by, NGOs working at the national level on issues of governance in the extractive industry. They have been demanding more involvement of the communities at that level. Have they been successful? I can cite some good examples from Tunisia, led by coalitions of NGOs, local NGOs that have been actually able to raise their voices, not in particularly get their demands, but at least make sure that they are present and part of the conversation that has been happening. Were they quite effective? Not really, in the sense that we'd like them to be. But at least there are discussions now around the necessity to involve this cluster of people that, and again, as we have already been saying, they are the entity that are actually receiving whatever we're having in the form of, impact. And I know that we're going to talk about impact later on, but good or bad, they are the frontliners of receiving such an impact. So, of course, as the saying of the founder of Transparency International goes, if you're not sitting at the table, then you are probably the menu. So, local community, I think, especially in these regions, should stop from becoming the menu. They should have a seat at the table. They should be able to say, to have a say in the ongoing projects, to see at least how they can benefit from these projects. Otherwise, we're looking at a form of an abuse that will continue. And it is unfortunate to see how this abuse is being translated into, international MOUs, that are currently happening under the pretext of a very glittery title, which is, energy transition, renewable energy, and so forth. These are very exciting titles, which at first glance you'd only assume they are a win-win situation. But when you deep dive into how they are actually being implemented, there are a lot of considerations and challenges that need to be addressed, firstly, by the government, the host country. They need to be aware through their policies. They need to be aware of their local community needs. They need to address them boldly and not just keep on playing that colonial, role or the colonized role, so to speak. So we really need to snap out of that finally and just be emboldened enough to wake up to our own needs.
Thank you, Diana. I think also this is so interesting for me to reflect on so many things. When you speak about countries' responsibilities, I think it's interesting to look at Lebanon. And today in this episode, we're discussing Lebanon and Tunisia in particular. And when we look at Lebanon and what we've been enduring right now, currently we're still surviving the war that has been going since 2023 on Lebanon. But at the same time, we've been witnessing ongoing crises since 2019 and, of course, many years before that. And these have left a lot of challenges when it comes to depriving of energy and reliable electricity. We're talking about an explosion. We're talking about political paralysis and, of course, lack of political will, and governments that are not taking the responsibility to actually support rural areas and people who are living in their lands and would like to benefit from the energy projects. Yasmina, from there, I'd like to ask you, what do you think were the most prominent impacts of the current war happening in Lebanon on Lebanon's solar energy in particular?
Thank you, Christine. I think you mentioned it that in Lebanon, there has been no support for any renewable energy projects since the crisis. And I think I'd like to start there that the war in 2023 has been very different from the 2006 war. So if we just start by the 2006 war, there was a very direct and deliberate target of infrastructure, including energy. So we know in 2006, they bombed the GA power plant. And I think up until this day, the pollution that it's caused is still being felt. But in the latest war, I think the strategy shifted a lot. So the primary target across the country was no longer national infrastructure. Rather, the target has been individual housing units. And if you look at the latest World Bank report, it says that 67% of the damages were in individual and private housing units. Now, that doesn't mean that there was no impact on the grid. Of course, whenever there was a strike on a house or sometimes a direct strike on the national grid, there were definitely losses of transmission lines, of distribution poles. And the latest World Bank report says that losses in the electricity sector have reached up to $207 million, and that's about 3% of the losses. But that report was limited in scope in the sense that it only looked at the losses at the national infrastructure and at UDL. So how many bills were not paid during the war and what was the damage on the grid. It did not look at solar energy. It did not look at neither at the individual level nor at the communal level. And it didn't even look at diesel generators, which, as we know, since the crisis have made up a huge part of our access to electricity. So what we know is that the damage is far worse than what the report says. We are doing this project with ARI, and Jana is on the board of this project, and we're looking specifically at the impacts of renewable energy on the impacts of the war on renewable energy. And what we've seen from the fieldwork that we've done in multiple towns in the south and in the Bekaa is that there is not one town that has not been affected by the war. Panels, unfortunately, they're more resilient in the sense that they are distributed, that one strike will not wipe out access to electricity for everyone. But they're also very fragile in the sense that a strike that happens quite far away from someone's house will damage that person's solar system. And so what we've seen, there are towns where we've spoken to municipalities and they've told us that over 90% of houses have had their renewable energy systems impacted. And most towns that we've visited have had some sort of solar systems installed at the municipal level, and these projects have all been impacted. One of the findings that we saw, and a pattern that was recurrent, was that a lot of these projects were linked to water. So renewable energy projects were made to pump water and give access to water for the village. And this was a primary target, whether it was intentional or not, we don't know yet. But this was definitely impacted. And as we know, if people want to return to their village, the most important thing they want is to have access to water. I mean, people got used to it, unfortunately, to live without electricity, but they cannot live without water. And so this has been a major problem for many municipalities. Now, in terms of how they've responded to it, because of the very high upfront cost of renewable energy projects and the unwillingness of donors to invest back in this, many municipalities have reverted back to generators. They've had certain donors donate generators to them. If it's not donors, it's the diaspora. And so we are seeing this is probably a short-term solution, because definitely it's very expensive to always have to buy diesel to have the generators working. But this is a trend that we've been observing. Something else that we saw is that in the border villages, renewable energy and energy projects were a direct target. We have seen this in a couple of villages. In Tir Harfa, there was a project that was fundraised by the community, by the diaspora, and it was a target in the first few days of the war back in 2023. And there's a lot of documentation of distribution plants being targeted in the border area. And I think we can say that this has remained a pattern in this area, I think, to make it uninhabitable, to stop people from returning back to their homes. And even if you see the latest developments that have been happening recently, people who have tried to go back to their homes in the border areas, getting prefabricated home with maybe one solar panel, are being targeted. And so I think this, in a nutshell, is what's been happening.
Thank you, Yasmina. Diana, Yasmina tapped on some of the solutions that the communities have been resorting to. What do you think are other solutions that they have been trying to use, or opportunities that they can lean on, especially when the government is not responding?
Absolutely. And again, I'd like to underline that the part of the bombing of these areas were to render these areas in particular unlivable. And you can only do that by targeting the infrastructure. And what we mean by infrastructure is, the all sources that will make available for the population water and electricity, as well as, of course, the roads. These are the three basic things that once you target and completely disable, people can no longer live in that area. And this is what we have seen systematically, in addition to hitting the agricultural, of course, lands, again, to make sure that this is indeed a permanent state of affairs and not a short-term one. Hello. Prior to this, we have seen, and we will continue, I believe, to see, we have seen some individual, very local efforts to produce energy via, these individual localized community-based efforts, whether it is a municipality that has taken it upon itself to, buy out all the local generators and it becoming the generator operator. So in one way, while this can be categorized as a monopoly, but on the other hand, this really reduces the CO2 emissions that are really out of scope and unbelievable in Lebanon, in such a small country. The other model is that you would see the diaspora chipping in, going for that. We've seen that even in areas in the north. One village that I always cite is the village of Tula, where the diaspora literally decided to light up the village that had almost zero electricity from EDL Electricité de Liban. The other is a pure public-private partnership where you would have, this, and we have seen that in Hasbaya, in the cluster of municipalities there, where there is this partnership and local initiatives led by certain investors along with the municipalities, building on the existing legal framework, which is, especially the PPP one, the Public-Private Partnership Law that was issued in 2017. We saw that there were certain issues, but quite localized, to produce electricity at this very local level. With the war and all the calamities that followed, all that was invested, whether through the diaspora, the private, some investors, very local investors, municipalities, and even, of course, Yasmina mentioned some. We're talking about donors, USAID, CEDRO project, UNDP, EU. They've all chipped in at one point. CEDRO project, for example, was huge on supporting small solar farms in Hasbaya to support the water pumping. So at least a cluster of villages would have their access to water. This all has one way or another stopped, okay? They have been completely down. The political decision that has been taken by the world or by those that are interested in Lebanon so far to completely not support until certain political demands are met is having its toll, is being translated severely at the local level, and it is turning into such an unjust form of energy production. And allow me a minute just to explain how. So basically, when the donor is absent or willingly ceasing any form of support, waiting for the demands, then this means that, and of course the government is far from helping, through EDL and others. They have their own agendas. They are working on their own reforms. We're waiting for the electricity reform, the ERA to be, authorities to be in place, etc., to unfold certain things. This leaves the space only for very local actors to work. And currently speaking, vis-a-vis the damage that has happened, this means that only those that are able to spend money and to bargain that they might actually end up losing in a month or two or even less, whatever they are establishing, whether it's a small solar farm or a generator they can, get together and buy for their own village, etc. They might just lose it in one single shot. This means that only those that are really able to afford it will do it. And this really is very bad news for the rest. Hello. Another component is the newly elected municipalities. They are fresh off the boat. Some have been re-elected, granted, but they definitely have zero in their coffers, okay? Awaiting for any, for future funds to come. In the midst of very concrete discussions around decentralization, the role, budgeting and all of that. But this is all still talking, and I'm sure it's still tied to the political will and the political intentions. So again, more pressure on very local initiatives that is literally translated into those that can afford it will have the ability to produce, and others are simply left to their own devices of maybe not getting a small generator just to light up something very very elementary in the household. This is not sustainable in any form. Now, I also want to focus on something, because this is something that we really need to pay attention to. In all studies of outages and challenges when it comes to energy production, electricity, those that suffer the most are women in the communities. So you are really looking at the suffering of women at so many levels, okay? They will be the end bearers of this big brunt. And this is something that we need to really look into in depth when we're talking about, in particular, the south of Lebanon. This is not something that we should be handling lightly. This is looking at a part of the community that will basically be bearing more than 80% of the brunt of whatever we're going to handle, or the negative consequences of electricity. Why? Because women will end up paying the biggest bill in the form of not having access to clean water because of shortage of electricity, not having access to utilities at home that will help them with their everyday to day lives, sanitation, sickness, all that trickles from it, everything will be affected. And they are the pillars of the household that will be affected. These are the marginalized, and I mean marginalized entities that we need to focus on. And these are the ones that are currently suffering. We are in contact with almost on a daily basis with these women, whether it is through certain entities that exist there that we are working with or others. But long story short, we're looking at dire scenarios. We're looking at a very skewed approach to support tied to a political situation. And I think we're looking at the most unjust situation you can ever see currently in our daily lives. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Diana. I think you tapped on many different layers of injustice and areas that are heavily marginalized and impacted in crises are the most areas that are prone to really recreating injustice in many ways. I think we have a lot to say on Lebanon right now, but it's interesting to also see how the same pattern repeats itself in Tunisia. And regions in Tunisia, like Gabes, Tataouine, and Tozeur are often also selected for renewable energy projects. And Diana, you reflected on even when solutions are happening, there's still a recreation of injustice. And here as well, we see that local residents are either not involved in decision making or not benefiting from the projects or initiatives. Yasmina, who is being left out from renewable energy projects in such areas?
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think it's exactly that. It's who is being left out. That's a question that unfortunately is not being asked, not by governments, not even by donors who are funding these projects. And the three areas that you've mentioned are very good case studies to examine these questions. Now, first in Tozeur, in Tunisia, there are many projects that are being implemented, many renewable energy projects. And again, we go back to this narrative that it's a desert, that people don't live there, that it's inhabited. So in Tozeur, there was a project funded by KfW, which entitled a large solar farm that left behind a very important part of the community and a very vulnerable part of the communities, which are farmers. Farmers that were already struggling with their electricity bills because of pumping water. Were not consulted when that project was implemented and did not even know if they were going to benefit. And effectively, there was no clarification on whether or not they were going to benefit from this project. And this also created a competition for these farmers for access to water. Since these projects were implemented in the desert, the panels needed to be cleaned very consistently. This meant that water that was initially used by farmers for their crops were then being utilized for the renewable energy projects. So it created competition for these farmers. Now in Gabes, this is also a very important area to look at now and in the future. Gabes has been historically marginalized. It has suffered from decades of phosphate production. It used to be really like one of the most beautiful areas in Tunis. The people there remember the days where people would come and to visit their beaches. Unfortunately, this extractive industry has really, really polluted the area. It's created conditions that are unlivable, and the inhabitants have been really for a long time protesting the presence of these industries. Now, unfortunately, it's now another site for extractive projects that are green hydrogen. And the newest project, which is the green ammonia projects that will then feed into the overall green hydrogen agenda, is set to be implemented this year. So I think what the government has been saying, the government, by the way, is a very big proponent of green hydrogen. They've put it on their agenda, and they are going and looking for money, looking for investors to come and invest in Tunisia. They said that they've consulted, that they've done their consultation, that they've talked to people. Now, I've worked a lot with activists, with movements from Gabes specifically, and they will tell you that we have not been consulted. There has been a lot of cherry picking and a lot of I forgot the term, but they choose who they want to consult with, and then they call it consultation. So this is a huge problem. And actually, on the 23rd of May, there was a very big protest that happened that was called for by Stop Pollution. Stop Pollution is a very strong activist group that has always opposed green hydrogen projects. And it brought about a lot of people, communities, youth, activists, and they have been their primary demand was to stop the pollution, but many of them who understand what green hydrogen projects will bring to the communities also put it on the table. So these stop pollution activists, there were also youth from a football group who decided to join this protest, and so people are actually mobilizing and resisting these projects. And essentially, this is what happens when people are not consulted, when their lands are being taken, when their resources are being taken. What ends up happening is that they will reject these projects, and this has happened in Tunisia historically. Before even the revolution, this was something that's been happening recurrently. Whenever you take people's lands and you don't give them anything in return, you will suffer from protests, disruptions. And the final case, which is Tataouine, embodies, I think, two important approaches or two important trends that have been happening. The first is how are people's lands being utilized or being valorized. So there's a wind farm that is set to be operational in, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Shnini, I think, in Tataouine. And there's been investigations in that, and journalists have gone and spoken to people, and the people will tell them that they are really being paid peanuts for this. And also something to note, in the south of Tunisia, there's a lot of communal land, and so land is jointly owned by people, and then this also creates another layer of problems. The other thing is that in Tataouine, there was a lot of friction between trade unions and the private sector. And this is a big component of just transition, which is job creation, job losses, job retention. And so in 2020, I think there was trade unions were very reluctant to connect a solar plant in Tataouine to the grid because of fears of job losses. Now, just 30 seconds just to say what the demands of the civil society have been when it comes to this energy transition is basically alternative solutions. They are rejecting these mega projects. They are rejecting the dispossession, the extractivism. They want solutions that are community owned, that are decentralized, that are community led. They've been talking about energy democracy, energy sovereignty. They want actual local development. They want actual job creation, not promises of job creation like it comes with green hydrogen. And they want safeguards. They want to make sure that projects do not create extra vulnerabilities, that they don't create extra dependencies, that they don't reproduce essentially the model that they have seen and witnessed with fossil fuels, with phosphate production, with essentially all of these extractive industries.
Thank you, Yasmina, for showing us also how local communities are responding to this. It's interesting to hear that there's a lot of resistance and responses to that. Diana, I'd like to take Tunisia as an example and try to compare maybe the approaches of the Tunisian government towards renewable energy governance and compare it maybe to Lebanon and other countries in the region. How do you think they are similar or different when it comes to green hydrogen in particular?
Of course, no, very frankly, they are not to compare. And we are at different paces, definitely. When it comes to the Tunisian government, they have had the policy and the legal framework in place for some time. For example, in 2023, they issued their strategy, their national strategy for hydrogen. Albeit it's quite ambitious, because they are promising themselves by 2050 to actually produce around, I believe, 8 metric tons, so they can be able at least to have 75% of it exported. I think this is quite ambitious, but it's in their plans. They have what in the Ministry of Industry and Energy, they have a hydrogen desk there in place, and they in general, they have the legal framework there to set things in motion. They are also, as Yasmina pointed out, looking out for investors to build that connecting pipeline, so they can connect it to the South H2, the pipeline, the hydrogen pipeline that basically connects North Africa, especially Tunisia, to Italy, to export hydrogen, Austria, and I believe Germany. So they are having these projects there. What is missing, very importantly for Tunisia, the cradle for the revolutions is the civil society buy-in. And if I want to look at the politics that the current government is adopting, it doesn't bode well. We're not going to go into a political analysis of this, but the basic, bottom line here is that there is no local support. And so far, civil society or civic space in Tunisia is still open enough to allow for impactful resistance, and so to speak. Is it being constricted? Yes. Is it enough to stop any form of impactful resistance to these projects? I don't think so. At the very local level, and I want to give you this example to see, the scale of what they're looking at. They have, prior to the renewable energy hydrogen, which is quite water intensive, as we've said, projects, regions such as the Bassin Minier, El Hawd al-Manjami, they were already suffering from drought. For information, 1 ton of phosphate takes 5 tons of water for treatment in order to produce it. Okay, if you turn on a faucet in the Bassin Minier, you're not going to have water. Drought was already there. So they already had that compounded problem. They had contamination at mega levels in Gabes, in Gafsa, because of all the extractive, especially phosphate, which is not a clean at all form of extraction. And it wasn't being done in the best form. So resistance there at the local level did exist. Civil society has been quite open about that. They have been demanding for years to see the environmental impact assessment, the studies that are usually mandated by law to be done by companies that are working there, OMV, others, so they can understand what these assessments actually implied. Otherwise, they have been hidden. Recently, there has been efforts to tap into these assessments so they can better understand what the scale of the damage is, and more importantly, what their governments have been doing so far, which was, to the misery of all of us, not very much, hence the drought and the contamination, etc. So the hydrogen projects come to in that point of time where things are not okay. You're not going into the Switzerland of the Middle East or the North Africa, and you're having this dream of hydrogen. You are already implementing such mega projects. You're looking at 6 MOUs with the EU alone, on working on different projects in a time and a place where things are not okay. They need water. It's a race for water. So is this creating tension? Yes, of course, citing some of the things, the continuous demonstrations against it, the demands to at least understand what is it going to be in for them as local entities, as those regions that are paying the highest price. Because if you look at also at the budgets and the distribution, it is not an equitable one. Bassin Minier is contributing X amount when it comes to phosphate, which is basically the main extractive commodity that is being exported to a certain extent. This is not reflected in the local budget that is being given back to that region. So things have already been quite tense. Add to this the fact that, and this is what I'd like to highlight about the civil society and the governance aspect of Tunisia, is that civil society for the past 10 years have been quite active in demanding implementation of global transparency standards. So Tunisia, after Iraq, that is already implementing the EITI, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, has been the second country. We put Yemen on the side. Unfortunately, they stopped implementing because of the obvious reasons of the war. So they have been vocally demanding that it is implemented, and this has given them a space to at least consolidate their efforts. They have formed a local multi-stakeholder group along with members and representatives of the companies, representatives of the government itself, and representatives of civil society, especially from Gabes, Bassin Minier, Tataouine, and others, to sit on this so they can become more vocal, demanding information that will help them hold their governments to account. Is this coming to a fruition? Not since the recent government has taken place. We have seen such global, or national efforts regress because of the politics. Is this boding? This is heading in the right direction? No. I believe we are looking at an explosive situation. Trade unions who have led the 2014, basically demonstrations, are not happy. They are completely facing an unjust situation. When you talk about renewable energy, hydrogen projects, etc., you're not looking at local skills and local hire. These are all imported. And this is what is going to be really bad, accumulating and adding to the already existing problem of unemployment, which broke into so many in 2024 demonstrations. This is a bad scenario by all measures. And I think it's being handled really bad by both the EU, that is not conscious of what they are treading in. They're acting really like an elephant in a china shop, very bluntly, and more importantly, the political elite that is currently holding, or I don't want to use capturing, but maybe holding all the decision making in Tunisia. This is, I think, a situation that is quite explosive by all measures, and civil society, trade unions, they have to be part and parcel of all the discussion. We cannot absolutely talk about any governance of especially renewable energy, hydrogen, anything of that sort, if they are not sitting at the table. So heads up, they really have problems. The final note on Lebanon, I did want to compare them. We are obviously not there. We don't have the hydrogen. We have efforts by local NGOs to have a discussion, a roadmap about it. We have actually local entities that are, private sector companies that are doing some projects but outside of Lebanon. What we have here is a good legal framework to initiate a distributed renewable energy at the local level. We have promises to finally establish after around I don't know how many years. Oh my God, I don't even want to think between 2002, the ratification of the 462 law, and today we have 20 plus years of waiting for the electricity regulatory authorities to be established so we can finally unfold renewable energy, or actually any form of, equitable electricity distribution all over Lebanon in a good manner. We're far from discussion on hydrogen. We're not there yet, and I'll end with these.
Not comparable. Thank you so much, Jana, I think it's a hard question to answer in just a few minutes, to be honest. Maybe I'm going to ask you both a final question that is like a little bit dreamy. What are the next scenarios for Lebanon and Tunisia, in your opinion, since we were focusing on these two countries in particular? Yasmina, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. I think I'll start with Tunis, maybe. Unfortunately, what it seems like in Tunis is that the government will go ahead in its plans, and both the renewable energy agenda and the El Med connector agenda both of which are going to be met with large-scale renewable energy projects. I think, in a sense, the government has been responding to a European agenda, and this is because no effect or no tangible or substantial amount of money has entered Tunisia. It's been quite a while because of their unwillingness to implement IMF reforms. And now that they know that there is a demand and there is money out there, they are going and just responding to the demand. So I think they will go ahead with this agenda. And unfortunately, I think we will see, when these projects become concrete, we will see a lot of resistance because there is no actual sharing of information that is happening, which is illegal. Many of the activists have demanded actually access to information, and they have not been receiving this information. There has been no proper consultation, and most of these projects, and this is something that I'm not sure I've mentioned, are happening in marginalized areas that have witnessed decades of this injustice. So they are very, very familiar with these types of projects, and they know it. So they know how they will react because they know that they have never, ever seen the benefits of fossil fuel projects. Every fossil fuel project and every phosphate project that has happened, which has used the resources of these areas, has then the revenues were then very unfairly distributed. The south of the country is where there's the highest level of unemployment, the lowest level of development. And if the country and the donors want to continue down that path, they have to make sure that there is local development, or else it will be met by resistance. For Lebanon, and this is something I wanted to mention before, but I think I will mention now. I think the way that the post-war reconstruction or lack of reconstruction is happening is deeply, deeply, deeply unfair. And I'll go as far as saying as it is collective punishment, linking this reconstruction to reforms that we're very well aware that the ruling elite are unwilling to implement, and then linking reconstruction to these reforms from all types of donors, including the recent investment or the recent loan that has been received by the World Bank. So I think the direction of where this is going is not looking optimistic, specifically for the most vulnerable people who have been impacted by the war. I think, as Jana said, there is a likelihood that these models of community or municipal-led projects will continue unless there are reforms. And unfortunately, this is not in the hands of people, but something that is very difficult to evaluate. I think that because the South has been historically marginalized, the diaspora is used to stepping in the absence of the government, in the absence of, in this case, even NGOs and all types of donors. And so they have been stepping in. So a lot of the reconstruction and a lot of the assistance that was given has been provided by the diaspora because they know that they have nobody else to rely on. Now, there are small initiatives that are happening there and then, but I don't think it's enough. I think there's now more than 100,000 people that are still internally displaced. This is a big number, and I think the government has to wake up and realize that unless something is being done about this, that the internal situation in Lebanon is at risk. And this is beyond energy. Now, if we are speaking about energy, maybe Dana can speak about this, but there is a new loan that is also dependent on reforms that the World Bank has given. I have my concerns about it, mostly because there was actually no consultation that happened when this loan was approved. But I definitely think it's at least at least there's no more lack of action. At least there will be some sort of developments that are happening in the sector, and this is always better than the alternative. But I still think that there needs to be assessments from a socioeconomic perspective and a justice perspective, and unpacking deeply and more specifically this loan. I think we're all waiting on more information and more transparency when it comes to the next projects.
Yeah. Diana, maybe I'll finish this amazing set of questions. I think I'm not getting enough, but I think we have to maybe finish with how you see the next scenarios for Lebanon and Tunisia. Maybe it's similar to what Yasmina said, but also on a good governance level. If you have some recommendations, that would be great for us to also hear.
Very, very concretely and quickly, because I think Yasmina summed it up beautifully, especially on the challenges, and how to move forward. And I think the expected scenario, so starting with Tunisia, from an advocacy perspective, when we talk about governance, if things cannot happen in the host country, you just move to the, to the other country, the country that is, on the other side, which is Europe in that case, and many countries that are involved there. Their governance mandate is big, is wide. Their civic space is big enough. And through global networks such as Publish What You Pays and RGIs, all these big ones, now we are able, and you have been for some time, to reach out to local organizations in the countries that are more or less part of the problem, and make sure that we address the problem there. This is what happened in Africa. They went to British Gas, in the very early 2000s, and they said, we don't know what's happening in Angola. Can you please give us some numbers? And this is how transparency started trickling in back in the days, So that's one way to start. Very concretely, Tunisians, we have the means. They are part of the networks, others, and we're not just looking at Tunisia, by the way, we're looking at many other countries. I can also put Iraq and say the same thing I'm saying about Tunisia, with even a bigger problem. If I want to take only Basra as a province as to what is happening, we demand equitable treatment, just treatment. If you're not going to do it at our host country, if there are deaf ears from the political elite that are currently ruling us, guess what? The others have laws, and we can really mobilize civil society there. I think this is one very concrete place to start, and I would completely advise that we do that, and we mobilize it from within. They are the aggressors by all means, and shades of gray of this word, because they are, and they continue, and they will be doing what they have done to Africa, now to MENA, because it's simply closer. This is when it comes to Tunisia, but I'd like to fully support what also Yasmina had said, has been saying. So when it comes to Lebanon, again, it is quite unfortunate that we are in a political knot again here, and a conditionality that is, beyond the scope of what we're discussing today, but I think beyond the scope of humanity as well, in all measures and means. But maybe this is an opportunity. And I'll be very, very transparent in what I'm saying. For years, Lebanon has been really, really reliable on donors and international donors. It is something very hard to say, but I think since we are already faced with the dire option of not getting help, we might as well start standing on our 2 feet, so we can really ensure the security, especially in energy, that we deserve it. It's going to be a very hard uphill walk, but the first place we can start, because we've already had the elections, is through those politically elected municipalities or publicly elected municipalities. They have the will of the people. They are there more or less in a transparent manner. Those that are elected have the buy-in of the people. We need to push for a decentralized agenda where municipalities have the mandate to produce enough electricity to become economically independent, to become economically productive. There, I believe, will be no other way. This is not a revolution against UDL. It's a way to make sure that we have, sustainable forms of existence. It's a way of ensuring that nobody holds, one person or one entity holds the lifeline to, the areas that we continue to see being suffocated by the minute. Decentralization, municipalities, using the current existing laws, which actually give us enough mandate to work. That would be the only way forward. Local, let's cut this umbilical cord when it comes to funders. They need to pay the bill. I do understand that, but let's start working as if they won't. That's the only way. And that's my final recommendation.
That's an amazing way to look at development in general, I think, Diana. So thank you for sharing this insight. Thank you so much, Yasmina and Diana, for bridging and intersecting solutions with sustainability, with a lot of global inequalities and patterns and challenges. I think this was a really, really comprehensive conversation. So thank you both a lot.
Thank you for the questions. They were amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Yasmina, as well. To our listeners, please stay tuned for our upcoming episodes of Jalsa Bi'iyya. And don't forget to share this episode with anyone who is interested in just environmental transition and understanding the patterns in our region. Thank you so much. Thanks, Diana
Thank
and
you.
Yasmina. Bye.
Thank you.